Well, I think the definition of this video or this entire race is I'm not crying, you are. Guys, welcome back to a brand new video and another episode of the F1 debates. It's been a long time since I've done an F1 debate video, and I'm just going to quickly lower the camera. And yeah, it's been a long time since I've covered an actual race in the F1 debate. And the reason really for it was A, timing, and also B, I didn't think that F1 2024 would do what it's doing right now. And I am a mess. I'm an absolute mess. I'm not going to lie to you guys. My voice has somehow not disappeared after screaming and shouting and celebrating the British Grand Prix. And I'm so happy. I'm so happy. I've been a fan of Mercedes for the entirety of my time. You can call me a Glory supporter as much as you want. I don't really care. I've been a fan of Hamilton my entire life. And to see him go through this period where even at the end of 2021, I was, Lewis was so badly screwed over that I was on the verge of not watching Formula One anymore. Like, I was so pissed from that occasion, but obviously, we keep on going, we move forwards, and to see that pathway from so many near misses, even in 2022, in that awful W13, there was many near misses there, like Zandvoort, I remember. The British Grand Prix, Lewis could have won there as well. I think if they hadn't had a safety car, he would have won. In 2023, even the US Grand Prix as well in 22, when Verstappen overtook him in like 3 laps to go or something like that. Where else has he had missed opportunities? There's been a lot of them. Even Sao Paulo 22, he could have won there. George did a great job in that one. In 2023, there wasn't really that many places. Maybe, obviously, I know he got disqualified, but the US Grand Prix was probably his closest shot. Maybe the Hungarian Grand Prix if he got a good start, but obviously he didn't and let Lando, Oscar, and obviously Verstappen through. But there's been so many difficult moments, and this Mercedes car has been getting better and better and better. And now we're sitting here as a Mercedes fan with back-to-back race victories. And if you said that to me at the start of the season, I genuinely would have said that you're deluded. I was on a call actually with Sam, my friend. You'll know him. And I said I said to him, and he said to me the same thing. Like, I was at the start of the season saying that I don't even think Mercedes will get a podium this year, let alone a race win. And while the race win in Austria was very lucky, with George Russell inheriting from the contact between Verstappen and Norris, this race was pure merit and pure pace. Mercedes was the fastest car around Silverstone. Obviously, there was just the time period between the sort of wet and sort of dry, wet-ish periods, the very first set of rain when the McLarens were quicker. But the rest of the time, really, the Mercedes was the fastest car. And that is very, very key going to the second half of the season. But also, for the first time, I think ever, in one of these F1 debate videos, I legit have notes on what to say, because I probably would spend my entire time rambling onwards. With my F1 debate videos that I've done in the past, I tend to give myself a couple of days, maybe even a week, before I give my thoughts. But I'm just so full of emotion. I felt like I wanted to just share my raw emotions of the title of this video. This race, this is why I watch Formula One. And I'm going to put this out here before people get a little bit twitchy over it. If this was, say, George Russell winning the Grand Prix, if this was Lando Norris winning the race, if this was Piastri getting his first win, I would feel the same way. And I don't, people will probably try and counter it because, the internet is what it is. But people would counter that and, say, well, you're a Mercedes and a Hamilton fan, so how can you possibly, you're just basically calling BS, really. But I sit here and I want Formula One to be good. And if that means that Formula One is good and it results in Mercedes not being great, fine. I'm cool with it. I just want Formula One to be good. And 2023 in particular was so bad. And then 2024, the start of it, was so bad that I was almost writing off the point of this Formula One, just time in Formula One, from the horror of 2021 and how it was handled to then seeing Red Bull and Verstappen dominating. And don't get me wrong, Verstappen will win his 4th World Championship at the end of the year. I have no doubts about it. But to finally just see a competitive grid again, we've had 6 different winners now this year, and we've had, what's this now? 3 winners in the last 3 races now. Verstappen in, what was the race prior? No, it wasn't. It was Barcelona. I knew I'd get there in the end. Verstappen in Barcelona, Russell in Austria, Hamilton now in Silverstone. This is what we want. This is what we breathe and live for. We live for races like this. Like my mate Sam, realistically, as a McLaren fan, he should be fuming with that race. And I'll get on to McLaren because they're in my list of notes to go through. He should be absolutely fuming me with that. But he was there. I was on a call with him while the race was going on, and it was so tense, and he was happy, obviously, that McLaren got a podium, but he also says, hands down, that was the best race of the season, because it doesn't matter who wins in Formula 1. If Verstappen is an 8-time world champion, or a 10-time world champion, I don't care, as long as the racing in the Formula 1 is worthy of what I invest into. And you're going to have bad races, right? You're going to have snooze fests. It happens. But this is the type of Grand Prix where if you haven't even watched it, watch it. Like, just go and watch the full thing. And for me, if that British Grand Prix highlights is the full race is on again tomorrow evening or Monday when I come back home from work, I might just watch it again. Because that is why I support Formula 1. And like I said, I can take off this Mercedes gear, you can give me some McLaren gear, you can give me some Ferrari gear because Hamilton's going to Ferrari next year. I will put on whatever I want, but ultimately I want what's best for the sport, and that's the main part of it. And I'm so happy that I've managed to sit here and watch an amazing Grand Prix. But let's get into it because I've rambled on now for 8 minutes of just talking about my life in Formula 1. So, first things first, Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes-Benz are back on top in Formula 1. For the first time since Jeddah 2021, Lewis Hamilton wins a Grand Prix. And I can't lie, I may have shed a tear when he crossed the line. I was so happy, so emotional, and just so happy for him. It was an amazing race from him. Obviously, he qualified on the front row of the grid, put George under a bit of pressure in the start of the race, and Mercedes really shocked me in this race because my heart was telling me that Lewis was going to win this race today. My head, though, was telling me that Lando was going to win this race today, and I stuck with my head. I thought Lando was going to win, but actually, the race pace of Mercedes really shocked me. I personally thought that Max and Lando would have too much for Mercedes, like in Austria. In Austria, obviously, Mercedes was, alright, they were half a second behind Verstappen in qualifying, but they were like 10th or 2 behind Norris, which is not that bad. And if you think about it, Norris probably could have got pole this weekend had he got his lap right in Q3. But ultimately, the Mercedes-Benz team, they just checked out front. Like, Verstappen was unusually slow. And obviously, my worry was, Hamilton and Russell got the lead. Verstappen goes around the outside of Norris. And honestly, I'm thinking, well, there we go. That's the fight over. Because I thought Verstappen then would get the run on Hamilton, maybe pass him. But if he didn't, he would have just swamped up and passed the Mercedes. Very much like the Spanish Grand Prix when Russell took the lead. Verstappen then got, just hounded Russell to the point where Verstappen breezed past him, controlled the race and won. But this was completely different. Like, the Mercedes duo got out of DRS range of Verstappen. Verstappen was in it for a couple of laps. Then he dropped out of it. Lewis stayed in DRS of Russell for a couple of laps, and then he obviously dropped out. The gap was maintaining then for quite some time at like 1.5 seconds between Russell and Hamilton, and the same gap to Verstappen. But that then doubled to like 3 seconds before obviously Norris got back past him. And even then, during the wet tyre stint, like Verstappen was 7 seconds behind. Like, genuinely, this was the first race weekend on pure merit, I feel, that Red Bull really didn't have the pace. But ultimately, and we'll get to it later, this is why Red Bull right now are the best team, and I say team in Formula 1 because their second place was so badly undeserved, but they as a team worked faultlessly to get that. But for Mercedes though, are they back in the spot now? Are they back in the spotlight? 100%. This is Mercedes now for me, back in Formula 1. The Canadian Grand Prix, I thought was a little bit of a one-race wonder. We've seen it so many times with the team. They've bought in an upgrade. they've done well, and then they've shot backwards, throughout the rest of the time, and then they just have this massive roller coaster of one great race and then 3 rubbish races, and then we're back, and then they're not back. But Canada was the start of a proper pathway for Mercedes, and I feel like Mercedes this year in 2024 took 2 steps backwards, or took a step backwards to get multiple steps forwards. They changed the concept of their car and they were behind the ballpark. But they've been able to put more performance into this car and give it a better potential that they are now official front runners and are one of the fastest teams in Formula One. There's no doubt about it. The Canadian Grand Prix I thought was a blip. Then we come to Barcelona and they were, they were slowly moving themselves upwards. They were faster than Ferrari. They were competitive versus Norris, but ultimately Lando did a different strategy to come on through. And Austria, again, they weren't quite at that level. Austria's never been a track where Mercedes has been suited. But come here to Silverstone, and bearing in mind, they really didn't put that many upgrades on. In fact, they really didn't put any upgrades on that car. They put circuit-specific elements on, so they made some changes to the rear wing flap in order just to allow for reduced downforce. They did the same thing on the front wing, so their front wing flaps were a lot thinner to, again, reduce the downforce. The only performance-related upgrade that Mercedes put on that weekend was something to do with the rear corner. And considering, there's been rumours and speculations of a new floor, new diffusers, they haven't even done anything to the side pods this year, Mercedes. They've not done a single sort of either change of side pod concept or just a redesign of it. It's been the same all year. They've just been able to modify the car to work. And like I said, around Silverstone, they were fantastic. They were the best team. I just want to say a quick thing for Russell. Very, very sorry for George. I was really gutted when he retired from the race. I think it was a water pressure problem, just sent the temperatures through the roof, and I was, really heartbroken for him. I know I'm a massive Hamilton fanboy, but ultimately I am, my order of love in Formula One is, as an F1 fan is number one. My joint fan then with Hamilton and Mercedes stays as it is, but F1's ultimately number one. Like I said, Leclerc winning in Monaco, for example, I was so happy for Charles to win there, and, that's the example. That's what we want to see in Formula One. Lando winning his first race in Miami, I was so happy for him to get his first win in Formula One. So that's what I mean. But for Russell, I was gutted for him. He put in such a great performance this weekend. He was better than Hamilton in qualifying. His race just didn't work out. I mean, the first stint, if it didn't rain, effectively, George Russell had the if it rains, it pours, and it poured on his race. He was great in the first stint. He held off Lewis, managed the tyres, managed the race. The first stint, then obviously Hamilton passed him when the rain came. And then that point onwards, the double stack, he meant he lost out to Verstappen. He closed the gap to Max, but then obviously had the issue and retired. So big shame from him. But also, massive credit to Lewis Hamilton in that race, because 2 things that he did which won him that Grand Prix for me. Number 1, the first shower that came in, the team said, "Box, I think it's time for inters." Lewis straight away as the driver, and the driver, and Martin Brundle says this all the time, when it comes to these wet conditions, it's when you rely on the drivers. And Hamilton specifically said, no, this is not time for inters. We're not boxing. And it was the right call, because the likes of Leclerc and Perez went on to the inters and lost 20 seconds in 3 laps. And then the end of the race for Lewis, in terms of credit, he had those soft tyres on a lap longer than Lando Norris, and he was able to hold off the charging Max Verstappen on his hard compound tyres, while Lando dropped to nearly 5.5 seconds behind Verstappen at the checkered flag, and also was only 5.5 seconds clear of Oscar Piastri. So Hamilton executed that race, and that just shows that greatness stays with you. And Lewis Hamilton that was prime Hamilton. That was one of the best race wins that Lewis Hamilton has ever done. For me, Sao Paulo 2021, the Brazilian Grand Prix, I still think is probably Hamilton's greatest race weekend of all time. But Hamilton's win here in Silverstone today was by far one of his top 5 race wins in Formula One. I thought he was absolutely incredible throughout the entirety of the race. And that's where I stand with Mercedes. Moving things on to Red Bull. That was a really poor weekend for Red Bull, which came across with a brilliant podium. They were fantastic in that one, and I want to give massive credit to Hannah Schmitz, I believe her name is. I probably bottled that, but it is what it is. The chief strategist for Red Bull. She nailed it once again. She's been absolutely brilliant for Red Bull, and this weekend they needed her because that car was the third fastest car by a country mile in that race. In the first stint, Verstappen took third place. Both McLarens got past him easily, and even Sainz was catching Verstappen, and you thought Max might even finish 6th here. This is a really slow Red Bull. They struggled in qualifying. Obviously, Max had floor damage, but the big expectation was when Max gets that new floor, which he did, and it was the same spec, so obviously I think it's the same, but when you put that floor on, he's going to be rapid, and everyone, even myself, was thinking Max will probably win this race because he only qualified 2 tenths behind with a broken, 3.5 tenths, whatever it was, with a damaged floor. But they were nowhere in race pace. They had nothing on it. But when it came to the crunch time and when it came to that final stint, Red Bull put the hard tyres on. And for me, and this is what I mean about why you've got to give them credit, I saw, obviously, Hamilton come in, he put on softs, and I'm thinking, that's a good call, because I know the softs were not good in the start of the race with Ocon and Zhou, but in these damp conditions, you want more grip, more stickiness from the tyre, which they obviously got, and also they can fire up quicker. The hard tyres, obviously as well, also there was less fuel in the car, so the cars were lighter. The hard tyres, I saw them go on to Max's car, and instantly I went, why are they putting him on hard tyres? That's a weird one. But they nailed it because Max was able to fire up the hard tyres, had the durability, and was able to push more. But like I said, the Mercedes car was genuinely that quick that Hamilton had the pace and the nursing of his tyres to hold off Verstappen. Was Verstappen right to finish where he was? Absolutely not. Overall, the 2 Mercedes and the 2 McLarens should have finished in front of Verstappen. But that is what I mean about Red Bull being the best team in Formula 1. They are the best team and the benchmark for a reason. Verstappen's an amazing driver. The Red Bull car is a quick car. But, and this is a big but now, the McLarens and the Mercedes are on top of Red Bull. And it's going to ebb and flow. In the next race, we might see Red Bull quicker. We might see McLaren quicker. We might see Mercedes quicker. It's a fight now between those 3 teams. And Red Bull desperately needs Sergio Perez up there. And is he going to do it? I genuinely don't think he will. But I'll get to Perez in a second. But this is where you need your star driver and you need everybody working on your A game. Verstappen did the best that he possibly could in that race, and it wasn't working out for him. And that's where, when your star driver can only do what they can do, you've got to rely on the other people in your team. I think people need to remember, while Verstappen is driving that car more so than where it was, more so than anybody else, and that's why obviously everyone says, well, we look at Red Bull and Max. Ultimately, this is also a team sport, and everyone remembers this. The rest of the team really put their heart and soul into that with their pit stops and with their strategy to give Max the chance to win the Grand Prix. They gave him the chance to win the race, and it nearly worked for them. It didn't work out on this occasion, but this is why Red Bull is still the team to beat. Because when the pressure's on and Verstappen doesn't have the fastest car, he still has a way of being involved in the fight for a win, when realistically, even I ruled him out at one stage. For Sergio Perez, though, another wretched weekend, a spinning Q1, and pretty much a race to forget. Obviously, he went onto the Inters during the first rain shower. That was obviously a strategical wrong call. I haven't heard on the radio whether that was Perez calling for it, or whether the team brought him in. Either way, it kind of ruined his race, and that's another no point scoring finish, which again for the constructors is poor, because McLaren would have gained points on Red Bull in the constructors this weekend, with Oscar finishing in 4th, Lando 3rd, Max would have lost 9 points to McLaren. I know they're probably 100 odd points clear, but every point counts in Formula 1, and obviously McLaren now have gained points in the last 2 races, and had Verstappen not had the strategy go his way, then he would have finished, down in, 6th odd place, and all of a sudden we'd be looking at 20 odd points gained. So, and there's still another 12 races to go this season. We're only halfway through. So the constructors' battle is still well and truly on, and Perez needs to up his game. There's obviously rumours about him potentially being replaced mid-season. I don't know. Ultimately, Red Bull are damned if they do, damned if they don't. They're damned if they don't because Perez is not putting in the performances. But if they do, they either get a driver that eventually doesn't put in the performances and they try and find a new one, or they find someone that's quick and competitive, but then that destabilizes the Verstappen camp and makes them angry, and obviously Red Bull don't want Verstappen to leave. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Moving on to McLaren, that was another race for McLaren now, where they should have won, and they didn't. And this is where we now need to start to question McLaren and their capabilities of fighting at the front. Since Miami, this is a weird one. Since Miami, we've now had 6 races since Lando Norris last won a Grand Prix. If you look at the performances that the McLaren has put in from the Canadian Grand Prix to the race in Monaco, to Barcelona where he got pole, to the Austrian Grand Prix where he should have potentially, he had an incident there, this British Grand Prix. Since Norris's first race win in Miami, McLaren haven't won a Grand Prix. Red Bull have won 3 races, Ferrari have won a race, and Mercedes have won 2. Now, if you told me after the Miami Grand Prix, when Norris gets his first race win, that Mercedes would get 2 wins and have more race wins now this season than McLaren, I would genuinely tell you that you are the most deluded human being on the planet, and you'd sound like a deluded fan on the internet, on Twitter or whatever, because that's just not right. The McLaren is equal to Red Bull, in my opinion. Mercedes, I don't believe, are equal just yet. This weekend, they were the fastest. Maybe it's redemption because they were the fastest in Canada and so forth. But anyway, this was a race where they should have won it. The first stint, it was definitely Mercedes versus McLaren. I think Mercedes had the pace. McLaren are obviously in the sort of slippery, dry conditions, but just before the crossover, obviously they had the 1-2. The first mistake, they didn't double stack with Oscar Piastri. They left him out and basically killed his entire race. The second issue then was obviously when Norris was leading the race, Lewis Hamilton undercut them. Now this isn't necessarily a massive problem because if you remember back to Sochi 2021, Mercedes was chasing McLaren. It was the roles reversed though. The rain was coming. Mercedes had a free pit stop behind them. Mercedes, again, in this position, when you're in a position where it's to do with weather changing pit stops, the driver in second, as long as they're close like Lewis was, 2 seconds it was, as long as he's in with that range, the guy in second is in a way better position than the race leader because it doesn't matter, if you're in second, you roll the dice and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, well, you were behind anyway. This was a circumstance where McLaren not only left Lando Norris out too long, but hindsight's a wonderful thing, they also put the wrong tyres on. McLaren had a fresh set of medium compound tyres that they saved for this Grand Prix and opted to counter Lewis by going onto the soft tyres. Now, I initially blamed McLaren for this one, but Norris actually made the call to go onto the soft. So Norris admitted Lewis went onto the soft tyres, so McLaren did the same thing. But the problem is McLaren are really poor on the soft tyres in race trim. And even Norris has been saying that. Which then begs the question, well, if you know the McLarens are weak on that tyre, why don't you just go to the mediums? They also would have had data from when Ocon and Zhou were on the soft at the start of the race. They dropped back quite considerably. And in hindsight, you look at Piastri, he went onto the medium tyres at the end of the race on the final stint. He was 15 seconds behind Lando Norris when they came out of the pits. By the end of the race, he was 5 seconds behind Norris. He gained 10 seconds on Lando in that stint. And that's once again, McLaren are throwing away a race victory. They should have won here today. There's no doubt about it. Mercedes, while they had the pace, things went in a way that should have not allowed Mercedes to win. But ultimately, they did. And McLaren should have won, and they haven't. There's a reason why Norris is disappointed and very hard on himself. I think he's a little bit too hard on himself, especially what I saw from the post-race press conferences. But he'll learn from it. But McLaren need to start learning quickly because they're just giving away silly opportunities. Norris probably should have won 3 or 4 races now in these past 6. And he's not won any of them. So, work to be done, but another successful podium for him. Next up, we're going to go to Ferrari, and they are in trouble. Obviously, first of all, let's give some credit to Carlos Sainz. Good, fair play to him. He actually had probably the best race he could have had, considering the circumstances. He was keeping up with Oscar in the first part of the stint. Him was racing pretty close. Then he was right on the back of Verstappen when Max dropped back from the 2 McLarens and the Mercedes cars. And then he just sort of faded away in the intermediate tyre stint. And then in the dry stints, he couldn't keep up with the pace of Piastri. But he came in then and boxed for the fastest lap. To be honest, what Carlos Sainz did today was what Mercedes have been doing since before they've been bringing these upgrades. They, sort of stick with the leading pack, and then all of a sudden they get out of DRS and then they just pull away, and then you just begin that lonely race that you're in. And that's where Ferrari are at the moment. They've had 2 upgrade packages. One upgrade package, the Imola spec, works better in the high speed and medium speed corners, and the Barcelona spec that they brought, which obviously got them the race win in Monaco, works beautifully in the slow speed corners, but then they suffer from significant bouncing. So they've got 2 spec cars which they need to find a way to merge them together, and they're going to take some pain now for the rest of the season. There's no doubt about it. And I know, why is Lewis Hamilton now joining Ferrari? Let's not get things twisted here. Hamilton was begging Mercedes to ditch the Zeropods concept in 2023 and produce a different concept, which Mercedes initially rejected. They then decided, oh, actually, we are wrong, went this way with the concept in 2024, and look at them now. They're race winners again. Whilst the engineers and the Ferrari team members are obviously very, very critical to designing a car, you can't disrespect the amount that a driver does. And Hamilton going to Ferrari will really help them in terms of overall knowledge. Also, Ferrari, I believe at the moment, are one of the last teams on the grid that's running a pull rod rear suspension. The rest of the grids have all gone push rods. And it's a case of, I think it's that way around. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. It's the front suspension where they're slightly different. I believe McLaren and Red Bull are pull rod, push rod. Mercedes are push on both front and rear. Aston have obviously gone that way as well. So maybe it's to do with the suspension that's really hurting Ferrari, potentially. Who knows? I'm not sure. But they've got some learning to do, and they need to get onto it. The summer break definitely can't come soon enough for them, because especially this triple header, when you've got an issue like they had in the Spanish Grand Prix and they saw that there was a lot of bouncing going on, when you've got then 3 races in a row, you can't really do anything apart from just take those 3 races. They can now use, obviously, the break now. There's a 2-week break, I think. There's no race next weekend. Obviously, I think it's the weekend afterwards is the Hungarian Grand Prix, so they can use all the data from 3 very different circuits and maybe find a compromise package. But for now, Ferrari, unfortunately, are going to have to do what Mercedes have done, take a few steps backwards to develop a potential going forwards. For Leclerc, it's the second time now that he's been on the wrong tyre at the wrong time. Came in for the Inters, it wasn't the right call, ruined his race. Tried, but, ultimately can't do any more than that. Hulkenberg, big up Haas, big up Hulkenberg. The second P6 in a row for Nico Hulkenberg. Fantastic result for him. And yeah, he's having one of the waves of his life right now. Brilliant racing. The upgrade package for Haas has been brilliant. It's worked a treat for him. Magnussen, unfortunately, couldn't make it work. Was out in Q1 and didn't really have a great race. A couple of overtakes here or there and a very hairy moment out of the exit of Stowe. How he saved that one, I have no idea. But Hulkenberg is such an under-the-radar driver that he's shown his worth. Obviously, Haas with a massive upgrade package. And again, it's a worry when you do what Haas do. If you bring a massive upgrade package, it's either going to work like it did for McLaren in Miami, or it will backfire like it's done for Ferrari and Aston Martin. For Haas, though, it worked beautifully. They outqualified the Ferraris. They don't have the race pace to compete with the top 4 teams, but they were easily the 5th best car out there. And Hulkenberg, a fantastic P6, thoroughly deserved. Obviously, Magnussen didn't quite get the points. It was another quiet race weekend for Aston Martin, but an improved one for them. I think Stroll was, P7 and Alonso P8 or P... Yeah, Stroll was P7 and Alonso P8. I can actually just get it up on my phone and find out who was where. But to be honest, all I've got on my Twitter feed right now is just Hamilton and Goat. But I should really get the top 10 up so I can find out where everyone is. Race classification. Here we go. This is what I mean by doing it on the fly. Yeah, so Stroll finishing 7th and Alonso P8. So it was a quiet weekend. I think they have taken a step forwards, though. Alonso said that they were able to attack the curbs more. Obviously, they revert again. Aston went a step backwards to take step forwards. They reverted back to the floor that they introduced in Japan right at the start of the season, and they brought a new front wing here in Silverstone, which was evident. A little bit of change to the curves on the front wing flaps. Also, the front nose expanded outwards to cover basically the whole of the front nose, similar to what Red Bull did. Obviously, everyone copied Red Bull by having that little lip right at the center of the nose to allow center of the wing, to allow the airflow underneath to get to the Venturi tunnels. Red Bull closed that off. Aston Martin have now done the same thing. They messed up in qualifying, just bringing their drivers out, but it was quiet for them. Williams, great race weekend for them as well. Albon getting into Q3, starting in P9. I didn't even realise he finished P9, so he got points for Williams. That's great for him. Ultimately, the rest of the grid, to be honest, I'm going to be very probably offensive here. I didn't really know anything about what they were doing because I was so busy absolutely pooing my pants about everything going on at the front of the field. But Albon with a P9 and Logan Sargent P11, 20 seconds off of Albon in the end. Great result actually for Williams. They need that. Some key points and also a good race from Sargent. Obviously, I think he started P12, finished P11. Kind of just did. That's the type of race that you need Logan Sargent to have. Ultimately, they need him in the points more often because Albon's getting the points for the team. But for Sargent, he's had a race now where he started in P12. Ultimately, I know the DNF from George allowed him to elevate a position, but at least he's not losing in a race. He's not going backwards. He did finish 20 seconds behind Albon, but I wasn't really aware of strategies, whether Albon came in first during the wet weather, and then Sargent, whether he lost out or whether the tyres was different. Again, I wasn't paying attention, I'll be honest. But it's a good race from him. It's also a decent race for RB. Obviously, Tsunoda getting P10 and Ricciardo recovering to P13 after he was, P15 at the start? For qualifying, or P16, one of the two. Obviously, RB, again, they're another team, I forgot actually, that brought a big upgrade package to Barcelona and completely slumped with it. They were really, really poor and had been poor, especially in Austria as well. They were weak. But here this weekend, big points, big points is 1 point, but motivational points that they'll need moving forward. So will Ricciardo take Sergio Perez's seat come the summer break? I will be shocked if he does, but the rumour is that he will. So we'll wait and see whether that comes to fruition. Alpine, that was a stinker of a weekend for Alpine. A race weekend where they probably will be very, very angry. Obviously, Gasly started back at their factory in Paris with the amount of grid penalties that he took, and obviously Ocon suffered in qualifying, but Ocon on here only finished in P16. Beat Perez though, so shout out to him for doing that. And Gasly didn't even start the race. So yeah, that's just a massive shame. They've been on a real big high at the moment, and they've had quite a lot of Q3 appearances, quite a lot of points scored, but not to be, unfortunately for them. And they'll be kicking themselves. And lastly, we go to Kick Sauber with Zhou finishing 18th and Bottas 15th. I personally think Sauber are probably the worst team on the grid. Zhou out-qualified Bottas, so fair play to him because that's the first time in 16 races. Zhou, for me, I don't think will be in the sport next year. I don't think he's a good enough driver. Bottas, I think he deserves a drive next year, but it's just the seats just seem to be filling up without him being involved, which is a real shame for Bottas because he's a brilliant driver, a race winner, a guy with knowledge, and a guy with a cool head and a proper team player as well. Maybe he'll sneak onto the grid at some point, but for them, it kind of is what it is. But guys, that is it for the F1 debate for the British Grand Prix. If you guys have enjoyed it, drop it a like, subscribe if you're new around here as well. I'll try my best to continue the F1 debate throughout the rest of the season, and maybe bring in some other topics. I know you guys do like the real life F1 videos where I talk about genuine real life Formula 1. I just haven't had the time to do it, and I just need to do it more. Basically, just find the time and do it. But this is why I watch Formula 1, for races and for memories and for moments like this. So from me, as a super happy Mercedes fan this weekend, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Take care all. Peace.